Australia, the land down under, my place of residence since birth. Have you seen 10 movies from Australia? Could you even name 10 movies from Australia? I mean, I live here and I might have a hard time remembering 10, which is probably not a good sign. But I think Australian film was good once, or at least people were watching it, which is something. So, let's go look back at the history. Do you think they had Disney Interactive Studios microphones in 1906? 1906 is the story of the Kelly Gang was arguably the first feature-length film ever, and it happened to be Australian. We have not hit the same heights since. I can't show you much of it, not a great deal of the over hour-long movie has survived, but it's honestly very interesting, just from a film history perspective. It's obviously about the bushranger Ned Kelly and his gang, and it was a huge success. So many people saw it. It didn't really leave Australia during its initial run, but it was very successful within Australia. And, this is important, it wasn't co-produced by any other country. Australia managed to make the first ever feature film on its own, which is very cool. It was also banned by the police for showing them in a bad light, which is not really relevant, but still a fun fact nonetheless. And from there honestly weren't really any vitally important parts of Australian film history until the 70s basically. The production of these movies were very slow. At this point, getting into filmmaking wasn't super accessible because you needed all the expensive gear. Australian film as a whole wasn't really getting pushed forward. But then, the government stepped in.
Hooray!
John Gorton created the Australian Film Development Corporation, which helped develop films, and then Gough Whitlam created its successor, the Australian Film Commission. Thanks, Gough! This started Australian New Wave cinema, which went from the 70s to the mid to late 80s. Over 400 movies were made during this period, which is more than every other movie made in Australia prior. The most famous movies from this period internationally include Mad Max 1 and 2, Gallipoli, Picnic at Hanging Rock, Crocodile Dundee, which is the highest grossing Australian movie ever, and so on. This is probably the most successful period for Australian film. America was interested, and like it or not, in order for Aussie film to succeed, America has to be interested. Slightly later on, 1992 had one of Baz Luhrmann's movies, Strictly Ballroom. It was the highest grossing movie of the year in Australia, and importantly, it marked the last time that the highest grossing movie in Australia was an Australian movie. Uh-oh. That being said, the 2000s was still pretty good. Nothing that topped the film charts, but, you know, good nonetheless. It just wasn't long after that everything went downhill. Let's come back to today. Welcome to today. I sit on exercise balls next to TVs now. What's new with you? There is such a remarkable absence of Australian films, and it's all, well, okay, it's mostly because of streaming services. Aussie audiences have far more options than they once did. We get same-day premieres of movies and TV shows, and when you only have so much time, why would you watch a low-budget, commonly bad Australian movie when you could watch Barbie? Why watch whatever new Australian drama they're spewing out on Channel 7 when you could watch Stranger Things? Only the safest stuff ever gets greenlit in Australia, and nobody watches it because they're not expecting it to be good, because it often isn't, so the government doesn't want to fund any riskier Australian movies. I mean, I guess Australian TV is slightly better off than film, just because the shows are on network TV typically, and some people are always watching network TV, even if that number's decreased quite a bit. A show premiering on, say, Channel 9 might not be incredibly popular, but it is on Channel 9, so that inherently brings a bunch of viewers, some of which might even like the show. With Australian movies, they might not even come to most movie theaters. I watch movies more than most, usually a couple every week on average, and I'm always trying to seek out Australian movies, but I hadn't even heard of 3 out of the 5 Best Picture nominees at the AFTRA Awards this year. Which, I mean, yeah, I guess that's my fault, but I don't think any of them came to the convenient, popular theaters near me, and I reckon I could say the same about most other Australians. I mean, it's not as if nothing's coming out. Talk to Me won Best Film at the recent Actors, and that made it very big for an indie movie. I mean, it wasn't like some huge Marvel-level blockbuster, but it did incredibly, incredibly well, which is great. It's just that most other Australian things fly under the radar. The 2023 movie Christmas was actually pretty good. I've done a full review which you can check out if you're interested, but long story short, it's a little flawed, but still very good. Basically, nobody's seen it. I watched the Jones Family Christmas as well, which was very, very messy, but nobody would know anyways because nobody's seen it. Just quickly backtracking, another thing about Talk to Me, it was co-produced by the UK. Elvis was popular, co-produced by the US. Power of the Dog, Canada, New Zealand, and the US, so on. No Australian movie that does well can only be Australian, which is not a terrible thing necessarily. It does, however, mean that less films from Australia can get big because other countries have to fund them. So, how do we fix it? Destroy online media streaming forever and ever, so we have to watch our own stuff. No, but seriously, it's hard to work out. Funding is a really good idea because then we can make stuff that's good to fix Australia's reputation so that people will watch. But that's a lot of steps, and for the government to pour more funds than it already does into the arts, it would realistically have pretty quick returns, which it won't. But for Australian media to work out at all, it usually needs money from the government or from other countries, but for it to be internationally successful, it realistically needs a bit of both. Womp womp. But I do reckon Talk to Me is a pretty good start. One indie picture from Australia with Australian culture and Australian accents will become 2, which will become 3, and more, which is so cool. Like, I love seeing people that talk the way I do, like the movie Backtrack. Not a good movie objectively, but it has Australian public transport in it, which is grouse. I've only seen the trailer for the Stan movie Windcatcher so far. I think it released a couple weeks ago or so, depending on when this video releases, but it was shot in a place that I've been to. I bought a Snickers there. That is honestly really cool, but unfortunately, nobody's going to watch Windcatcher. Not yet, at least, but I want to have hope. I think with enough time and government support and international support, we can have a really good film and TV industry. We can put out genuinely good stuff that's profitable and everything. But in the meantime, I'll have Channel 7's new Australian dramas to keep me company. Maybe if I'm lucky, Channel 9 will reboot Underbelly. Fingers crossed. And then it would become the most popular TV show ever, winning every award, forcing Hollywood to close forever. That's a vivid nightmare I had just last week. Absolutely horrifying. I see it every time I close my eyes. Bye.